All right, time for section 2. We're going to keep talking about infectious diseases, but now we're going to talk about what our body does to keep us safe from those infectious diseases, okay? So our body has a lot of defenders. We're going to get into some of those specific cells you see there, but there's really 3 basic lines of defense, okay? Your overall immune system has these lines of defense, and the overall function is to protect us against pathogens. It's to fight off those diseases, okay? We'll talk about each of these lines of defense in much more detail, but real quick here, the first line of defense is barriers, like walls, okay? So I'm sitting on campus right now, and we are surrounded by fences and gates, okay? Walls are a physical thing that is supposed to keep people out, okay? Well, your body has walls that helps to block against pathogens, okay? Second line of defense is something known as the inflammatory response. I'll give you more details on that. And then finally, the third line of defense is really the main part of the immune system, and it's the immune response. It's definitely the most complicated part of it, but that's the inside defense. It's like this army that's just ready to go and waiting, okay? So let's start with barriers. Your number one barrier against pathogens is your skin, okay? If your skin is intact, the pathogens cannot get through your skin. They can hang out on your skin, and then if you pick your nose or rub your eyes, they can get into your body that way. But your skin will block the pathogens from getting in. If you cut yourself, that's now an opening for pathogens to get in, and that's why it's important to wash when you cut yourself. It's to keep those pathogens off, and things like Neosporin actually contain some antibiotics that will fight against infection, okay? So again, I probably have bacteria, hopefully not COVID, it's not funny, bacteria on my hands right now, okay? But I have no cuts on my hand. Most viruses aren't gonna cause problems to your hands anyway. It's like your respiratory system. Anyway, there's nothing that the pathogens can do on my hand. But if I pick up a sandwich and start eating it, I could get it into my mouth that way. If I, again, rub my eyes or put my fingers in my mouth, pick my nose or something like that, or if I shake somebody's hand, I could spread that pathogen to them, okay? So that's why we wash our hands, okay, to keep those pathogens off that are gonna get on your hands, okay? Our breathing passages are considered another barrier. And we've learned, as we talked about the respiratory system, that those passages are lined with mucus. And that's so that they trap dust, but also pathogens that come in. And then we've got those cilia in there that sweep that mucus down into our stomach, because our mouth and stomach actually contains chemicals that can destroy a lot of pathogens. Not all. Sometimes we can still come up with something like food poisoning. The pathogens are too strong even for the acids in our stomach, where the pathogens will get past that mucus lining of our respiratory system, and it can still settle in and cause problems. But for the most part, these 3 things take care of a lot of the problems, okay? If it gets through, then we go to our second line of defense, and that's known as the inflammatory response. So the inflammatory response really is a localized response, okay? Meaning it's going to respond where the pathogens are happening. And the easiest way to talk about it is if you have a cut, okay? So we can see right over here, this is the skin, and this is a cut in the skin. Those little green things, those are the pathogens getting in, okay? Well, with the inflammatory response, fluid is actually going to come out of the blood vessels. You can see this little capillary right here. Fluid containing special white blood cells is going to leave the capillaries and go to the site of the invasion, if you want to call it that, okay? Those blood vessels are actually going to get a little wider to carry additional white blood cells to the site. And so because of that, because these white blood cells are heading towards the problem, and because these blood vessels are getting wider, you might notice your skin gets red, it might be a little swollen, and it might feel a little warm. That's inflammation, okay? But that's the inflammatory response going and fighting against those intruders, against those pathogens, okay? If it's a larger inflammatory response, throughout your body a little bit more, or for a disease-causing pathogen. Well, they're all disease-causing, but like one that's maybe in your respiratory system as opposed to like a little infection at a cut. If the infection spreads, your body might start running a fever, and that's an attempt to harm that pathogen. Okay, so a fever oftentimes goes along with kind of an extended inflammatory response. There's some debate on how much you should treat a fever. If a fever gets too high, like even over like 101, you should probably take some medicine to knock it down. But if you can stand a few degrees of a fever, it's actually your immune system fighting against the pathogens that are in there. One of the white blood cells is known as a phagocyte, okay? And it does something known as phagocytosis, and that's a kind of a cool process where it basically comes along, and you can see this phagocytosis coming and getting ready to attack that cell. And what it does is it just swallows it up. Have you ever seen that magnetic putty that kind of swallows up a magnet? That's exactly what's happening here. And then once this closes on the other side, there's, remember the lysosomes we talked about in the cells? They digest waste in a cell. Well, these lysosomes in these phagocytes contain chemicals that will then digest these and literally kind of eat them up and get rid of them, okay? So that's also part of this inflammatory response. All right, well, what if that doesn't work? Then we get our third line of defense. And I want to give you some vocab before we talk about the actual process. Lymphocytes are another special type of white blood cell, and they're much more specific. They go after targeted cells, and we'll talk about why in just a minute. But the main ones are T cells and B cells, okay? And they have a big role in this immune response. We talked about this briefly when we talked about blood types. Cells have antigens on them. Pathogens have antigens on them too. And your body recognizes your own antigens as good, but it recognizes any foreign antigens as bad, okay? And this is why organ transplants, when somebody has an organ transplanted into their body, they have to actually take medication that suppresses their immune system, because the antigen from somebody else's body is going to be recognized as bad by our own immune system. And if your immune system fights against that organ, it's going to reject it. And so the person who gets a new organ has to kind of turn their immune system off in order for that organ to be accepted by the body, okay? And then there's this thing called antibodies. We also talked about that with blood types. These are produced by the B cells, and these bind to the antigens, okay? And they're very specific. The B cells produce specific antibodies for a specific pathogen, and they bind to the antigens on those bad cells, and they basically like say this needs to be destroyed, okay? So they either clump together so they don't work, or they clump together so phagocytosis can come along and destroy a whole bunch of them at the same time. Or there's other methods of destruction, but those antibodies help with that. Now the cool thing is those antibodies stay in your body once they're produced, okay? So we'll talk about that at the end a little bit, but if you think about an army, okay, you've got your frontline troops, right? But sometimes they need reinforcements. So those antibodies are like the reinforcements. Well, once they're produced, they stick around. And so if you get introduced to another pathogen again, if you've been exposed to it before, your army is already bigger and more capable of destroying that pathogen, okay? I'm going to get back to that in a minute. All right, so this looks kind of complicated, I know, but just kind of follow along. You've got these T cells and B cells. I'm going to move myself down there. Here's some T cells. There's another T cell. There's B cells. Okay, so just kind of pay attention to them. Oh, and here's some antibodies. Okay, as I go through the steps, kind of pay attention to those. All right. So initially, the T cell will recognize the antigens on the pathogen. Okay, and those T cells are like, whoa, this isn't okay. Something's not right. Okay. Now, some of those T cells will attack immediately, and those are called killer T cells. I know, super original, right? But then some of the other T cells will go and ask for help from the B cells. They actually go and activate these B cells, okay? And those are called helper T cells. I know, I didn't come up with the names. All right, the B cells then are what produces all the antibodies, and those are specific to the antigen that they're going to fight, okay? And those antibodies, again, they bind to the antigens and they cause the pathogens to clump together, and it just marks them for destruction. It makes them easier, okay? Now this memory B cell has those antibodies. That's what kind of sticks around in your body in case you're exposed again. And so your body will still go through this, but it doesn't have to wait for those T cells to activate the B cells and then they produce the antibodies. There's some already there ready to go, okay? So that brings up this debate of how clean is too clean, okay? How many of you guys are a germaphobe? And it's really hard to talk about this right now because we should all kind of be germaphobes with this COVID-19. I'll be honest, I don't like hand sanitizer. I've never used it, but I'm using it now because we have to be super safe. There's a balance between good hygiene and just being smart and being too clean, okay? Because our immune system works by being exposed to things, we have to be careful. If we prevent any exposure, our immune system isn't going to have any of those antibodies. Our army is going to be small. We're not going to have any reinforcements. And so this is why a lot of time young kids are just allowed to go play in the dirt, and they know they're going to get sick. Parents know they're going to get sick, but they're building their immune system. Kids that go to preschool, they get sick all the time because their immune system is somewhat underdeveloped at that point. But every time they get sick, their immune system is getting stronger and stronger and stronger. If somebody is using too much cleanliness and preventing any exposure from some of these pathogens, it might actually cause allergies because the person's immune system is so weak, they overreact to normal things that might not cause problems for other people. So again, this is a balance. I'm not saying don't wash your hands right now. I'm not saying don't use hand sanitizer right now. We are in a global pandemic. We need to use all the reinforcements possible. But aside from COVID-19, on a normal basis, yes, you should wash your hands before you eat. Yes, if you've sneezed into your hands, you should wash your hands. Yes, if you're sick, you should stay home. But you shouldn't freak out about those things. If you shake somebody's hand, don't lose sleep over it. If you're touching objects or doorknobs, don't lose sleep over it. You don't have to use hand sanitizer every time because your body is actually getting stronger by being exposed to some of this, okay? Use common sense. Wash your hands before you eat. Wash your hands if you're sick or exposed to somebody sick. Just be smart, okay? All right, stay safe. Talk to you guys later. Bye-bye.